Good morning, everybody. My name's Valerie, and it is great to start the day with you. Well, we talked a lot about prayer in the sermon last weekend, and this morning I wanted to talk about something that really has helped me personally when it comes to prayer. Now, have you ever had a moment or been in a season where you just don't even know what to pray? The situation was so complex or just so overwhelming, or you weren't even sure what was right in that moment. I have been there many times. So, what do we do in those moments, in those seasons? Well, as I mentioned in the sermon last weekend, I often am tempted to just try to manage the situation and come up with a plan and then just basically pray my plan to Jesus. Like, here's my need, here's my plan, please approve, God. But that's not surrendering. That's not receiving whatever God's answer is. And it's not being patient for God's way or God's timing. And you know what? Honestly, sometimes life is at such a point I can't even pray the plan. I can't even think of a plan. The last few years have left me feeling like that a few times. And so, what do we do in those moments? Well, there are some verses in the Bible that have been such a huge help to me and given me so much hope in those moments. And they're found in a familiar passage, actually, Romans 8, verses 26 through 28. Now, I know many of us are familiar with Romans 8:28 that says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose." And that's such a great promise. As we go through life, even the hard things, God can work them out to be for our good. That seems wild to say about some of the most difficult things. It doesn't mean those hard things are good, but God can use them for good in his redemptive power, in his way. But what I want to do is go to the verses that precede that, verses 26 and 27. And they say this: "In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God." And I just love that, because when we don't know what to pray, when we can barely even bring ourselves to utter the words, either from confusion or pain or frustration or whatever, when we don't have the words, these verses provide us such a great comfort that the Holy Spirit interprets our groans, interprets our tears, interprets our silence, and just translates all that into a prayer on our behalf. And I love that sentence at the end of verse 27 that says, "And he's able to intercede in accordance with God's will." Because isn't that what we all ultimately want? We may want our plan desperately, but at the end of the day, we all know God's will is best. We want God's will to reign in our lives. We want your kingdom come, your will be done. And that is how the Spirit's praying for you right now, in that thing you can barely breathe out, in that thing that is overwhelming you. The Spirit intercedes for us in those moments. So what's heavy on your heart this morning? What's hard in your life right now that has you just feeling overwhelmed or just practically paralyzed in life and prayer? You don't have to have the answer. You know what? We're not going to have the answers. We're not God. We don't have to figure out what is best and pray that plan to Jesus. I hope these verses encourage you today that the Holy Spirit is taking your silence and your tears straight to that throne of grace that we talked about from Hebrews chapter 4. And remember, as always, it is grace. It's the grace of God that extends to us in some of our darkest times and quietest moments. It's just pure grace that we would have the Spirit to intercede for us when we're in our darkest times. So be encouraged. There is hope today. Even in that thing you're thinking about, there is hope, because there is Jesus. I hope you have a great day.